Think about your favorite memory. Is it crystal clear, or is it slightly or very fuzzy and blurry? In this video, I'm going to show you how blur can elevate the quality of your pictures and your workflow to an entirely whole new level. So let's roll. Hi there, welcome back to Half-Light, where we do all sorts of crazy things in photography. So in general, there's this preconception how a good image has to be sharp. And a lot of times that is true. Blur just adds this new layer of creativity to your pictures, making them even better. So in this video, I'll be covering 5 different ways, angles, how blur can improve your photography skills and the quality of your images.
So if you do like the content of this video, then please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Thank you so much for your kind support.
So first, let's talk about unintentional blur. It happens to all of us. Your shutter speed is too slow and you don't notice, or maybe it's too windy and your hands are shaking, or your just hands happens to be shaking for those few moments, or maybe somebody pushed you and you introduce this unintentional blur. Here is an example of one of my recent shots. This was completely unintentional, but I kept this image because I like this kind of additional quality it adds to this picture. So my tip number 1 would be to not discard blurry images just instinctively. Give them a chance, look at them once again, and do not delete them from camera on site just because you know there's a blur. Go home, look at them on your big screen, and then make a decision. There will be a select few which will stand out and which will be really great pictures. Next, there is the intentional camera movement, or ICM. So this happens when you intentionally, purposefully move your camera, typically horizontally or vertically, or sometimes even zigzag, and introduce this blur. And you can amplify this by selecting a slightly slower shutter speed, so you basically add additional blur. Now I'm betting you may be thinking, well, this is something you can do in post-processing. I'm gonna say not necessarily, because when you do that intentional camera movement with your hands or with your body, there is a certain unique signature to it which is yours, meaning that that movement will not be perfect, it won't be perfectly smooth. There's going to be some acceleration or deceleration or some additional movement in other directions, micro movements. And a lot of times you won't be able to reproduce just that in Photoshop, even though you have all these countless filters that you can use for introducing blur. So do not just discard ICM because you think you can do it in post-processing. Experiment and you will be surprised what kind of great results you will be getting. Just don't. I know, yeah. I had that blurry vision too, yeah. But that was vodka, so yeah. Sorry about that. So where was I? Oh, ICM, and I'm actually done with that. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So next, let's talk about panning blur. When you do panning blur, you have a moving subject, and you are attempting to follow your subject with your camera, ideally matching the speed. So the result will be a picture where your subject is crystal clear, but everything surrounding the subject, foreground, background, will be blurry. There's going to be this motion blur because you are following, you are panning. Here is an example of one of my pictures I've done a couple of years back. And this is a great way of adding this sense of motion, and this can be super creative. Then there's blur in post-processing. I already touched briefly on that. Do not discard that though, because today in these Photoshop-like apps, you have all these very different blur filters. And in one of my previous videos, there's going to be a link down there in the description, I introduced this cross-motion blur technique, or the way I like to call it, half-light effect, which can really have some very profound and deep results which just change the mood of the entire picture. So blur added in post-processing is a great way of experimenting, because excuse me, you have all these tools at your disposal, and yes, a lot of times it will seem not so natural, too artificial, but hey, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And if you, especially if you go for subtlety, you know, those effects will seem more natural, and then your options are really endless. So go for it. Then there's depth of field, something many of you have heard of. The idea here is that you have a shallow depth of field, meaning that your subject is in focus, it's sharp. So I'm not talking about movement here. Everything is still, ideally. But everything behind, so the background, is going to be blurry. So there's going to be separation. So with blur, you can add these layers of separation to your image. And it doesn't have to be only the background. You can add that blur even to the foreground. If your depth of field is shallow and your subject is at a certain distance, then the foreground and the background will be blurry too. And yes, ideally you will need a fast lens for this, which are expensive, where you can actually open the aperture wide open. But if you don't have one of those lenses, you can still experiment with it, for example, by going as close as you can to the subject. Depth of field is something that you can definitely experiment even if you don't have necessarily have those very expensive lenses. And then of course there's the mother of all blur effects, slow shutter speed. Just think of those silky, smooth, milky white surfaces of water or waterfalls. That's just really one of the best techniques there is. And not just for water, it works for clouds as well. It's really amazing what you can do with those. And here you can see some of my examples. And this reminds me of an additional angle of blur. You can consider this as a bonus tip. With blur, you can hide things a lot of times. So sometimes I have this image with some distractions in them, and when I try to remove them with these removal tools, and I'm not talking about AI removal, in general, I try to avoid those, but that's gonna be, I think, in another video. But by using these removal tools, I just cannot get the result I want. So a lot of times what works for me is to create blur. Of course, you have to be careful and you have to plan, but you can blur out the distraction and the surrounding area. So it's still there, but now it won't be drawing your attention. Your eyes will still kind of be led to the subject, which was your original goal. And yes, I know I mentioned tip number 1, and then suddenly I ended up with a bonus tip and no numbers in between, but you get the idea. I mentioned all these blur techniques as tips really to encourage you to experiment with them and just keep them in mind when you are out there and want to create something outstanding and something truly beautiful. So in summary, do not fear blur, embrace it. And when you do that, I promise you, your photography skills and the quality of your images will be elevated to a whole new level. And this opens up a whole new world of possibilities, creative possibilities, where you can do really some absolutely amazing stuff. So let me know down in the comments your thoughts about blur. What do you think about blurs? How do you use it? Do you have some other techniques which I haven't mentioned? Maybe you have some example images. And as always, thank you for being here. It has been my privilege to talk to you and spend some time with you, and I hope to see you guys again next time. Now go ahead and create some blur. Bye.